Go live. Dima? What's up? You joining this meeting?
Well, I'm gonna have it playing on my phone. I have a open office hour, so I'm gonna mute it if I have kids come, but I kind of want to see if any of my kids show up, and I'm interested in hearing like what the conversation's about.
So just so you know, we put this on YouTube Live because there were more than 100 kids that were interested. So did you direct your kids to come to the Zoom or to the YouTube Live?
The Zoom.
Can you direct them to come here? Hang on, hey Judy.
Hi.
Let me forward this to you. I will forward you the link to the YouTube. Like, hey. All right, Dima, I just sent it to you.
Okay, sounds good. I'll upload it. All right,
okay.
See ya.
Yep, see ya. Bye. Hey Judy, this is Hunter.
Oh, Hunter, hi.
Hunter's
Nice
the
to meet you.
English teacher. He's new this year.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I'm just getting ready.
Oh, that's
having
cool.
2 kids in the stay-at-home order and having to be like on a video chat is a lot.
No, I understand. I understand. You know, one thing I wanted to say is I have.
Hey, Kristine. Hey, good morning.
I've never done a Zoom with people asking questions before, and I understand, Adam, you said that they'll type things that will appear on the screen. Is that how it works?
No. So what we're doing is because the popularity of this, I put this interview on a Facebook group I'm in, and forensics teachers around the country. I hope this is okay. So this actually, there are going to be people around the country watching this.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't ask about that. Is that okay? I can remove the link.
It's okay with me. I mean, if you might, I think you should check with Kristine when she gets on.
She's on. Can you see her, Judy?
I cannot see. Oh, yes, I can see you now, Kristine. Kristine, is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, go ahead then.
Awesome.
But anyway, so you were saying, Adam, because it's on Facebook, what does that mean about asking questions?
So what they'll be doing, what the kids will be doing is they'll be asking the questions on YouTube. Hunter is going to monitor that YouTube stream, and then he will kind of interject. Hey, here's a question from one of the viewers, like
so
that.
He'll just say it, and I will hear it.
Yeah, Hunter's going to be asking the questions, and I'm kind of going to be running the just letting you guys talk, basically.
Okay, so like for example, in my presentation, I have certain points where I ask a question.
Yes.
And a student could respond. Is that going to be unwieldy? Do you not want me to do that?
The problem is with that is there's about a minute delay between.
Oh, then I won't. Okay, then I won't do it.
Okay.
Because that would slow everything down too much.
Yeah. All right. So Judy, I'm gonna.
What I'll do is I'll explain when I start to talk that I usually do this as an interactive thing, but I won't be able to because of this. But I will say there'll be times when I will ask a question and I want them to think about what they would answer, but not to answer because it would delay things. And then at the very end, there'll be time for questions. And then how will that work?
Then the kids will ask questions on the YouTube, and then Hunter will relay those questions to us, to you and Kristine.
Okay. So will there be a time delay with that too?
No, I think once you finish up, the kids will have already asked some questions that Hunter can kind of throw out, okay. And then after those questions have been answered, the time delay will kind of have stopped being a problem, and then we can do a more free-flowing Q&A. Okay. Does that work?
That's awesome. Fine with me.
So let me get started. Welcome. If you're watching this on YouTube Live, we are very fortunate to have 2 incredible people with us. On the lower left, the woman with the glasses is Judy Royal. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself, but she works with the Innocence Project. And on the right is Kristine Bunch, who hopefully you guys have read and watched a little bit about her story, and she's going to be sharing about her journey and with criminal justice. So, Judy, I'll let you kind of take it from here. When you're ready for the pictures, if you still want to do that, I can put them up on the screen whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Okay, as Adam said, my name is Judy Royal, and I, for 17 years, worked with an organization called the Center on Wrongful Convictions, which is an innocence project, which is part of Northwestern Law School. And I am currently an attorney now with the Moran Center, but I still have an affiliation with the CWC, and I still work on some innocence cases. So I'm going to do this presentation. Usually when I do it, it's interactive. I ask questions and get responses right away. But because that won't work right now, what I will do is I will ask questions, but not expect a response from you right away. And then it's just for you to be thinking about it. And then at the end there'll be time for you to ask some questions. Okay. So this is a case that the CWC worked on. So I'm going to take you back to October 13th, 1997, in a small town in southern Illinois. A graduate student named Julie Ray runs to her neighbor's home in the middle of the night, saying that someone has kidnapped her son. The neighbors call police, who go to Julie's home and find her 10-year-old son, Joel, on the floor on the far side of his bed in his bedroom. Joel has been stabbed many times and had a faint pulse, although he then died shortly thereafter. Julie told police that she had woken in the night when she heard a scream and ran toward her son's room, looked into his bedroom and didn't see him, but then collided with a man in the hallway. They fought in the house, and she tried to keep the man from leaving, at one point throwing her arms around his legs and being dragged through the house before they crashed into a door together, ended up in the backyard, where he hit her harder, dazed her, and got away. Julie had a cut on her arm, which was bleeding, and various reddish smears on the t-shirt that she was wearing. That what you see on the screen is the forensic scientist sketch of the t-shirt. The murder weapon was a knife from Julie's kitchen, which was found on the carpet in the hallway. With what I've told you at this point, do you think that Julie killed her son? And I will tell you now, although there's more information to come, that Julie was arrested and tried for the murder of her son, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to 65 years in prison. This was before the Center on Wrongful Convictions became involved in her case. With what I've told you about the facts, what areas of the scene would you want to test for relevant forensic evidence? I think you can get a hint from the screen right now that the t-shirt she was wearing is something very important. Now, the t-shirt, there are photos of the t-shirt also, and I'll apologize, the photos just are not really that clear, but you can see that when there's been a crime and there's something like this as potential evidence, it will be photographed, but the forensic scientist will also draw these kinds of detailed sketches. And these sketches show the front and the back of the t-shirt, and they also show these circles or arrows to areas that they think are something that should be tested. In this case, they were suspecting that these were blood stains or blood specks. So I will tell you that there were 19 blood stains on the t-shirt that Julie was wearing. Of these, 2 of the blood stains had her son's DNA on them. The right front shoulder had a little area, and the right back side of the t-shirt had a little area. Julie's blood was found on all the other stains. So no other person's DNA is found on the t-shirt. Based on this, do you think Julie killed her son? And I will also mention that something to keep in mind when you're evaluating a case is, since Joel, the victim, was her son, his DNA could innocently be on the t-shirt. He could have sneezed on an area or coughed, or the blood could have potentially been from a nosebleed or something. So it's not as crucial when it's a familial relationship. But in this case, let's just assume that that is significant blood. Okay. Now we're going to discuss the t-shirt more later, but let's move on. So what else should be tested?
One of the students was also talking about the wall that they slammed against, and as well as any blood under the fingernails of the son.
Okay. I'm sorry. The wall that what?
That they slammed against.
Okay. Well, Julie said that she struggled, that she collided with someone in the hallway. And then the guy was trying to escape. She was running after him, at one point grabbing onto his legs, and at one point they crashed on the door. Her story does not say that they ever slammed into a wall.
Okay.
And actually in the house, one of the reasons that the police were suspicious was they did not see major signs of a major struggle in the house. So that is another point to know. Now, in terms of the child's fingerprints, the child's hands, a lot of times when somebody has short fingernails, you do not necessarily find useful evidence. There was a hair found in the child's hand, okay, and some blood on the child's hand. And that was something, which is something that I think you would all agree should be tested. And it did not match to child, did not match to Julie, and it didn't match to somebody else who became a suspect later on. And I will just say to your classes that if you're talking about somebody who is found on the floor, that hair is not necessarily significant, because you may not realize this, but everywhere you go, you're shedding hairs that you're not even aware of. I mean, you're aware of your pets, but you're not aware of your own. Hairs are here, there, everywhere. You walk into a room, you might have some hairs on you from somebody else that you've just got. And so a hair that's on the floor could have been there for days, and it could be completely innocent and just end up, the child's hand touches it, and it could be completely unrelated to the crime. So I'm saying it's definitely worth testing, but it's not necessarily as significant use as you think it might be. So, okay, now I'm sure you're going to think, what about fingerprints? Were there fingerprints in the house? Were there fingerprints on the murder weapon? Well, no fingerprints were found. But another thing I have to say is the law enforcement individuals, for some reason, did not thoroughly fingerprint the house. And this was just shoddy police work. This was a little town that had very little crime, and they weren't used to really thinking about how thorough that they needed to be. So we had a fingerprint expert when we did the second trial, and he said, you should fingerprint all sorts of things, because you never know. Any fingerprint that does not match to somebody living in the house is potentially significant. But they did not thoroughly fingerprint, and there were no fingerprints found on the knife. Okay, so now let's talk about the child's bedroom, because that's an area where you would want to look closely for DNA evidence. And I'm not showing.
So sorry to interrupt. Somebody also asked about any bloodstains on the shirt. why there weren't any bloodstains on the shirt?
On the mother's shirt?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will jump ahead to that.
Okay.
I think that if you've studied forensic science, you have you understand about the different types of blood stains. You understand that there's a blood drop looks a certain way if it drops passively from an object, that a blood stain looks a different way if it's cast off. For example, a knife going back and forth, if blood flies off that, it looks a different way on a stain. But what on Julie's t-shirt, the two areas that we're really interested in are the areas that had some of the child's blood, okay? And these two areas were both smears. And so I think that I assume that you've studied this, but the way you would get a smear would be if this t-shirt came in contact with something else or someone else that had blood, the victim's blood on them. So in other words, the mother's Julie's story about coming into contact and having a brief struggle with the killer is consistent with a blood smear being found. Another thing to remember too is that one of the blood smears was on the back rear part of the t-shirt. And so if you're stabbing somebody, how would you get a blood smear on that? So that's a very good question. The t-shirt is, we argue that was some of the most significant evidence of the case. Now, anyways, let's go back to talking about the child's room.
Is there a certain picture you want me to be on now, Judy, for the bedroom?
Well, let's stay on that picture for a minute, the one with the comforter.
Okay.
The blanket. Yeah, let's stand there. Let me just say, I deliberately am not showing you any of the photos of the child's room other than this one. And I know that you, I mean, I don't mean, to treat you like children, but these are extremely disturbing photos, and I don't think you need to see them to evaluate the forensic science in the case. But this was a room that had blood all over it, and there were many, many objects that had blood. There was not just, the bed and the floor. There were many, many toys and various objects around it, and that had blood on it. And so it's really, I thought it was just too disturbing. Anyways, so. Remember, the police chose to test just like every item in that room that had that had even a drop of blood on it. There was a lot of time and attention put on that. Now, can you imagine why they were so interested in testing everything? And the reason is, I think, is because Julie told the police she had not entered her son's room after she heard the scream. And Julie ended up with an active cut on her arm and all sorts of her own blood on herself. If the police had found a single drop of Julie's blood on anything in that bedroom, that would have meant she's lying probably. And that would have been extremely important to the case. That her blood was not found anywhere in the room. It was all victim's blood. But there was no stranger blood found in the room too. So, anyways, now you see these two gentlemen holding up the child's bedspread. Now, when we hired a crime scene expert for the second trial, he just groaned when he saw this photo, because he said this is the absolute last thing you would want to do, is to hold up this comforter like that, because all the fiber and trace evidence is potentially falling off it when you do that. When instead what you do is you very carefully fold it up and take it and to examine it carefully. But these guys were not experienced, or I can't explain why they did this, but in any event, I'm showing you this picture because this is another example of how not to handle a crime scene. Okay, so another question is, that photo shows the knife. This is the knife that was found out in this hallway, which was between the two bedrooms. Remember, Julie says she came out from her bedroom, ran to look in her son's bedroom, came out and bumped and ran into this guy there. So if they had a struggle, one possible explanation is that he dropped the knife at that point.
So I guess one of the questions I'd have, Judy, is why is there no blood on the carpet there? Shouldn't there be some blood?
Well, there's a little bit of blood. Okay. You just can't see it in this photo on the knife and under the knife. There's a little bit.
Okay.
It's just if somebody has done a very bloody crime and runs out of a room, they're not necessarily, the blood's not necessarily dripping down from them. It's on their, it's staying on their clothes unless they bump into other things. Okay, another question with this kind of case is, how did the alleged intruder enter the house? Well, there was some broken glass by the garage door. This was a house with an attached garage. And the prosecutors argued that the broken glass was not in the position it would have been in if somebody had broken in that way. And that they argued that that showed that the mother had staged the scene to cover things up. But one of the things that I learned in this case is from the crime scene expert is that it's really easy to break into homes without breaking glass. And this is not a happy thought to realize, but anyways, that's what he told me. And especially if it's somebody who is an experienced criminal and knows how to do it. So the fact, a lot of times police will say there was no sign of a forcible entry, but that doesn't mean that a criminal did not enter. And I'm gonna go to the broken glass point, and then it's part of the next point. Another area, of course, crime scene, they're gonna look for wherever they can find blood in the house. There was blood from the casing that held the glass part of the back garage door. And there was blood on a piece of the glass from the back garage door that was victim's blood. Now, yeah, why is this interesting? Because it shows that the glass, this blood got on the glass broke after the crime, or there wouldn't have been the victim's blood on it. So it's not like it, so anyways, that's something that's significant. Okay. Also, another thing to think about is where else would you look for blood? If you think that if a crime has taken place on somebody's home, where else would you look for blood? Well, you would look for evidence of cleanup. So the sinks and tubs showed no blood. You know, you understand, I'm sure you've already studied about luminol testing. So this is very significant. Julie's nail swabs showed no blood. Now her nails also didn't show intruder DNA. So let's show the photo of her nails again. Well, anyways, the photo will appear in a second. But you can see that she has very short fingernails. So in this kind of situation, like I said, there might not be DNA from a struggle with the intruder, but it's more likely that there would be blood than there would be intruder DNA, because blood might get under the nails, but there was no blood on her hands or her arms from the child. So another thing about, if we're talking about was there a cleanup, one of the points I said when I gave the initial facts is that the victim, the child was still alive when the police arrived. So in other words, how would she have time? How would she have time to do cleanup? Anybody who had done this crime would have blood all over themselves, all over their clothes. And if she's going to go around and, like, you know, break glass, change her clothes, do whatever, put a little blood on her new clothes, whatever she's doing, there's no time, because there just isn't time with the child still having been alive. And the nature of his injuries showed that there was not much time between when he was stabbed and when he would die. Okay, now let's look at the slide of part of Julie's face.
And then I have 2 questions from the discussion here. Was there any evidence in the yard, like any signs of a struggle or like grass that's been disturbed? And then the next one is, could your lawyer in the original case have dismissed the mishandled evidence, like when you had a picture of the guys holding up the blanket?
Okay, first question about the grass. There was a police officer who testified in her first trial that there was heavy dew on the grass in the backyard, but no sign of a struggle, and no sign that anyone had run through the yard. So does this make you think that Julie was lying and that there was in fact no intruder? Then my next question is there any way that you might challenge this testimony? Because one of the things about doing this type of work is when you have something that sounds bad like that, you try to think, is there a way you can double check this or contradict it? Well, we found out that there are historic records on weather conditions. And weather conditions are very important to people, especially in farming communities. So people are checking temperatures, they're checking moisture levels, all these kinds of things are checked, daily, and these records are kept. So we got an expert, and he looked back at those records, and he said, based on the temperature, the humidity levels, et cetera, he said that there was absolutely no way that there could have been any dew on the grass that morning. No way. So the police officer was lying or confused or whatever. But I mean, he evaded testifying in the second trial. So in any event. Okay, the other question was, about whether her lawyer could have had the evidence thrown out. Well, I mean, what you could do as an attorney in that situation is you would have your own crime scene expert who would testify that that was sloppy procedure and evidence could have been lost. And then the jury makes up their mind how much weight to give the evidence. That's what could be done. Okay, now we're looking at the photo of Julie's eye. Now remember, she said that she had been in a brief fight with the intruder. The prosecution argued that as part of her staging the crime, she inflicted wounds on herself. So what we did was had an expert talk about this. And if you look at this photo of her eye, imagine that if you were trying to leave certain injuries on yourself, try to picture injuring your eye like that. Try to picture punching yourself or hitting yourself hard in the eye with something. It's very hard to imagine, isn't it? Because you have sort of an instinctive reaction to protect your eyes. You would be much more inclined to injure yourself anywhere else on your body than your eye like that. And that's one of the things the expert testified, is that it's just very, very rare that someone will injure their own eye. It's not like it's impossible, but it's very, very unusual. Now, I'd like to also look at the photo that shows Julie's legs when she's sitting on the doctor's office table. Okay, now I'm sorry about the quality of these photos, and you can't see this very well, but the doctor note puts this in his notes. If you look at her knees have reddish abrasions on them. You can see it a little bit in the photo, and you can't see this in the photo, but her feet, the top of her feet, also have some abrasions on the top of the feet. So I don't know if anybody can think about why that might be significant. But since I can't hear your answers, I will tell you. It is because it is consistent with being dragged across carpeting. When you're a kid and you're playing, you get rug burns. It's consistent with being dragged across carpeting, which is what she said happened.
And it seems like it would be, if you were faking injuries to yourself, you would not rub your foot on carpet to inflict an injury. That seems like an unusual injury.
It seems odd that you would think of that. Yeah. It's not the obvious thing to think of. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so the Center on Wrongful Convictions did a second trial of Julie's case, and I have run out of time, so there's a lot more I could talk about the case. I just am talking about the forensic science aspect, which I think is very significant in this case. But when you read more about the case, you'll see that there's also a serial killer aspect to the case, which is something that people actually are very interested in. But I don't really have time to get into it. You can ask me questions at the end if there's time. But these are the forensic science facts of the Julie rape case. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Kristine Bunch.
Hello, everyone. So in 1995, on fire, and murdering my 3-year-old son. I was found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison. I was also 6.5 months pregnant with my second child. During the early 90s, there was, well, still today, although I hope that we are eradicating it as much as we talk about it and focus on it, firefighters, arson experts would go in and look at what a fire left behind. And that's how they made the determination. There wasn't a whole lot of scientific testing. There wasn't, advanced training. These men were taught on the job by the previous arson investigator. And so when you walked in and looked at a dwelling, they would see a pattern on the floor and they would immediately jump to accelerant. The bad part is that as you walk for years the same way in your front door, over to your kitchen, over to your living room, those fibers get compressed. So when a fire breaks out, they burn a little bit differently because they have been pushed down over years of use. So that leaves the pattern. There was no accelerant. It was simply a walkway that burnt differently. And we didn't know that until science started really getting involved and really taking a look at what was left from these fires and realized that accidental fires could leave behind the same traces as an arson fire. That's where forensics comes in, and you need to take a look at samples. You need to hypothesize, you need to prove it. And so many fires in the past have not been proven. They've went off of misleading myths and all these indicators that they said were a sign of arson without proving that it was truly an arson. So with my case, I mean, I was in shock. I'm a young single mom. 2 hours after the fire, they've told me that they've determined it's an arson. They think that somebody came in to intentionally murder me and my child. And they want to know about all my family and friends who could have come in and did this. So in that moment, I'm broken. My soul is shattered. And they come in and lie to me. And of course, I believe that, an innocent person doesn't ask for an attorney when you're being questioned and you have investigators talking to you. That's the very first mistake that I tell everyone, don't make it. I don't care if you're innocent. I don't care if it was an accident. I don't care what it is. If you're being questioned, it's your right to have an attorney there. And it does not make you look guilty. It does not make you look anything, but you need to protect yourself. And I would certainly not say that all police officers are bad. I do police trainings now and share my story and talk about ways that we can stop this from happening. But there are still some that believe this mentality and don't think that the science has changed and don't follow the trainings and are not updating themselves. So when you go in, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to do the scientific testing. You have to back it up. It took 17 years for me to prove that it was an accidental fire. And I watched my son grow up for 16 years while I was in prison. By the time that I got the Center on Wrongful Convictions to come on and take my case, I had already written to them once, and they told me they didn't have the staff or the resources to take on a case like mine. That changed in about 5.5 years later. And at that time, when they come in, I'd already been studying. I'd already been learning. I told them that we needed to see the ATF report because just because they said something was there and they couldn't identify it, I knew from my research that they could identify it. Everything had been identified. So I said, we need to look at the raw data and we need to identify it. Telling a jury that something was found in a child's bedroom that is unidentifiable is just a way to make that person that's sitting on the defendant's side look bad, because they're hearing government experts say, well, we found something and we're just not sure what it is, but it's there. And if I'm sitting on a jury before all this happened and I hear a government expert tell me that, I'm going to convict that person. I'm going to believe them. I'm going to trust them. So when you're talking about arson science, you really have to look into it, because V patterns have been talked about over and over again as, you know, the source or a place where something happened, or it's an indicator of arson. It simply means that something burnt on the floor there, and as the smoke went up, it left a V pattern on the wall. You don't know what was sitting there. It's not an indicator of anything until you put the whole picture together and see whether or not that's truly something. So it wasn't just V patterns, it was pore patterns, it was concrete spalling, it was blistering, it was alligatoring. All these terms were thrown around, and they sound really technical, and like people, you know, don't understand it. But if they hear an expert say it, they're going to say, oh my God, well then that must be something. Not always. Not always. As we've progressed, our materials in our furniture and our household goods have changed. So when you're talking about something burning, we're not talking about, you know, old wood and cloth. We're now talking about synthetics. So those melt and cool just like a liquid and fill in that part of your floor that's well traveled and that everybody has walked on for years and years and years. So that can explain the pattern, not simply just those fibers that have been worn down. The blistering and the alligatoring, that's just where it's burnt in a significant pattern. That could simply be the glue that was used to put down the linoleum, the tacks that were used on your carpeting and carpet padding. So I tell everybody, you really need to, you know, educate yourself when they're talking about fire science, because they throw out these terms trying to confuse somebody, and that's just not the case. The other major thing that happened in my case was we had new forensic science, which was toxicology. So she determined cause of fire based off of my son's autopsy report. So Tony had gotten to an 80% carboxyhemoglobin level. So he died of smoke inhalation before the fire ever broke out. That's significant because an arson burns very hot, very fast, gives off a low level of carbon monoxide. With an electrical fire or an accidental fire that's caused in a wall or the ceiling, it smolders for a very long time. And that gives off this poisonous carboxyhemoglobin, like glass cloud that just fills up your whole area. So by the time the fire breaks out, all that goes up in flame because it's been building. It's heat, it's poison, and it will ignite all at once. But that also proves that it wasn't an arson, because yes, everything was burning all at once, but there's no way that he could have gotten to that carbon monoxide level with an arson. So we went into court. I expected that we had proven everything. I went in front of my original judge and my original prosecutor. They did not choose to believe they made a mistake, so they denied my petition. And my lawyers said, you know, our shot is the appellate court, oral arguments. We don't want you to get your hopes up because that doesn't always happen. It happened. And I was reversed and remanded for a new trial. I came out August 22nd, 2012. I had went in April 1st, 1996. And I thought that I was going to be preparing for a new trial. they quickly realized that fire science has changed and there was no way they could retry me based on our new evidence. At that time, I really became aware of how often this is happening, especially with women. So I spent a great deal of time talking about women's cases. I've talked about Julie's case. Julie is a very dear, sweet friend. And I feel like mothers that are in this position that lose a child, it's very easy for them to come in and take advantage of the situation because we're hurt, we're broken, essentially. And we're just trying to do the right thing to explain why our child isn't there. We don't realize that they're going to use that against us later. Since I've been out, I have worked a lot of jobs. I worked at Evanston at the Northwestern Alice Millar Chapel and was part of student engagement for Northwestern University. I loved my time there. It was incredible. But the students really were the ones that helped me the most with reintegrating into society, because it's embarrassing to get out and say, I am 39 years old and I don't know what to buy in the grocery store. I don't know how to set up internet and cable. I don't know all these changes. And asking somebody my age, I feel like they're going to look at me like, you should know that. But the students, they were just figuring it out as well. So they were quick to tell me when I'm setting up internet and they're asking me, do I need a router? And I was like, no, I don't need a router. And he's going, and so I covered the phone. He said, that's what draws it in. I was like, oh yeah, I need one of those. And I realized quickly that getting community help would help other exonerees. So I started a non-for-profit called Just Is for Just Us. And basically we take care of spur of the moment things. So that could be anything from gas so you can get back and forth to work. That can be your first box when you get out. Because if you think about everything you used in your house this morning, just getting up, getting a shower, getting dressed, an exoneree has none of that. They don't have a toothbrush. They don't have clothes to put on. They don't have deodorant. They don't have ID. They don't have a credit score. They're virtually starting over from nothing. And we get asked to go speak. And we talk about our stories. What people don't realize is when I get asked to speak, my very first thought is, do I have enough gas money to drive there? And if I'm flying, am I gonna have enough money to pay for taxi or Lyft or Uber back and forth from the airport to wherever I'm going? And most of the time, the people that are asking for you to come speak can't really afford to pay you very much. So you don't really make any money off of it, but you go do it because you don't want this to happen to another person. You want people to know that, yes, they see the headlines that somebody won $10 million or $20 million. That's less than 1% of all exonerees. Right now, we have very few states that truly compensate and truly help. I'm fortunate to say that I've gotten to help with some legislation in Wyoming. I worked with the Innocence Project and we were able to get a new law passed that if somebody has new evidence for an innocence claim, they can submit that to the court at any time because they had a 2-year time limit. And the way we advance in technology, I just think that's ridiculous to have any kind of time limit. And then this past year, we passed compensation in my home state of Indiana, which I hope eventually starts helping people because so far no one's gotten paid yet and no one has gotten the reentry program that we put with that. which I think is vital, because I went in for reentry and said, hey, can you help me with my resume? Can you tell me how I'm supposed to explain this 17-year gap? I just want to be able to get a job, and I would like to be, boosted a little bit on technology. I have worked with computers, but I haven't had internet access. And she was like, oh, sure, honey, when were you convicted? And I told her, and she said, there's nothing here. And I said, well, no, I was exonerated. And she said, that means you're not eligible. And I said, I can't get any help. And she said, no. So I spend a lot of time telling people, we have an organization. I get calls from people that say their car broke down. They just need a little bit of help. They've had, a medical issue come up and they need their rent paid. We don't give out cash. We don't really have that kind of resources coming in. What we get, we give out to whoever asks. And when a new person comes home, I've got a few volunteers that say, you know what, I'll go shopping for a box, or I'll donate a half an hour to help them with their resume, or to show them how to get on the bus system, how to get a bus pass, how to use their cell phone, because most of them have never seen a cell phone. When I went in, it was this big mobile thing that sat on a base that you couldn't get very far away from. Now I have this phone that I've had for 7 years now, and it still does things that I don't know how to work. But it's letting people know that no matter where you are in life, what you have, what you don't have, you have something to give. There are a huge number of people out there who are scared, who don't know who to turn to. And if you could donate money, gift cards, time to show them things, or if you could just pass along their stories so that other people are willing to give them a job with no work history. Other people are willing to let them get in and get resources. Other people are thinking about them and thinking about what they went through when they're voting, when they're sitting on a jury, and they're asking the hard questions, and we're making sure that this doesn't happen again. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions, because I know Judy is very interesting and she knows a lot about a lot of cases. So if anybody has anything, or you want to hear about something specifically, please ask.
So Hunter, I know the students I think they've been asking some questions. Can I ask one question, Kristine? And thank you for sharing. I can't imagine what it was like to go to prison knowing you didn't commit the crime and knowing that you lost your son. The strength that you have shown in the years since is just inspiring and incredible. And I applaud you for being a light in this world. One question I have for the trial that I thought was interesting. There was a guy named William Kennard who testified on behalf of the Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, the government branch, that there was liquid accelerant found in 2 rooms. It later turned out that the ATF didn't have proof of that, right? Am I saying this correct? There wasn't.
That's correct. They had falsified the report used to convict me.
As you have had, as you think about this, did you ever get an answer why they lied, why they falsified the report? Did you ever get an answer to that?
No. And William Kennard died right before I was released. So I will never get an answer to that. Of course, my lawsuit was dismissed because they have immunity. They're allowed to get up there and say whatever they want to say. And I think what's so heartbreaking to me is that there are 3 other cases, all arson cases across the country, that are in court fighting, and they had the same ATF chemist.
Wow. That's hard to hear.
Yes.
Hunter, do we have some student questions?
Yeah, sorry. I had to mute myself. My daughter was throwing a tantrum outside of the door there. So there's a question with one of the students is, so we have the same ATF person that's giving testimony. But between your conviction and now, do they now have more empirical tests? So instead of saying like, oh, look at this burn pattern here, like you were talking about, it seems like you're really well versed in all the different types. Now, can they say like the toxicology test on your son, can they do the same thing with the burns?
So basically what happens when you think you have a pour pattern, or you think you have some kind of a liquid accelerant, you don't trust the dog that's alerting on that. You don't trust the electronic sniffer. You take a sample and you send it off, and they use a gas chromatograph. So that measures the carbon points in that item. And those carbon points can identify whether it's gas, kerosene, so on, so forth. So yes, they do have tests. The issue is they're able to say, you know what, I don't have a positive reading, but this mother acted funny, and she's a single mom, and she's loose, and she's a party girl, and you know, she's got blonde hair. So for women, I mean, there's a smoke screen that goes on with the jury, so that they're not sitting there listening. Wait, do they have the forensics? Do they have the science to back it up? And those are the questions we need to be asking when we're sitting on a jury.
Some other questions that we have in here. First of all, everybody's very appreciative of you sharing your story. The next question I have is, with missing so many years of your second son's life, how has this affected your relationship with him?
It's it's hard. When I first got out, of course, I wanted to be, you know, full-time, hands-on mom. And he felt like he was being disloyal to my brother and my mom, who were so instrumental in raising him. And so that caused a wedge. We did counseling together. And, you know, he talked about my PTSD, and I talked about his PTSD. And virtually, I just realized I'm causing more problems for him. So that's when I moved to Chicago, and I got a job there and gave him space to let him see, you know, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in your life in whatever capacity you want. I just don't want to hurt you. And so it took a while, but I mean, now, you know, he's 22, and I've met his girlfriend, and he calls me once in a while, and then I text him, and he tells me, no news is good news, mother. It's fine. I'm fine. And so, I mean, I'm happy with what I have. I feel like despite all those years, I have more of a relationship with my son than some other people have with theirs at the same age.
Okay. And then another question is, and I'll ask, there's a couple more questions, but the first one that goes with your statement right there is, what kept you going? Because it seems like it was really difficult when you were exonerated to get back into life. So what was your motivator?
Definitely my son, but also my baby brother was 17 when the fire happened, and he quit school and started working 3 jobs. And he took my son and made sure that my son was there every week to see me. And he never gave up on me. He stayed there through it all. And when I walked out, he knew that I was scared and overwhelmed. And he continued to stand by me and take me to the grocery store and explain what non-GMO meant and gluten-free and all these things that I'd never heard of. And he was the one that, you know, can talk me down and tell me, you know, the commissary truck is not going to be late. You don't need to have 6 deodorants, 6 bottles of shampoo. So I think the two of them really kept me focused and kept me motivated. And I didn't want to feel like I let either one of them down.
And Kristine, to put it in perspective for our teenagers watching, I think you went to prison before the internet was a thing, right?
Yes.
You came out and the iPhone 5 was already out. Like, that's the
Yes,
gap.
it was.
You basically missed the entire internet age and iPhone age.
Yeah, when I came out, I wanted a Droid because I'd saw all those cool commercials and that robot voice of this Droid. So I tell my brother, I've got to have one of those phones. I want to hear that. But yes, it's crazy. And when I first got on my laptop, I mean, my very first picture on Facebook was the night I got out. And my son was like, you need to be on Facebook. You don't have to talk to all these people. They can message you. And so he took a screenshot, and I think I'm looking really crazy on a phone or something. And he was like, this way everybody can keep up with you and know what's going on. And it was different. It's still a little overwhelming. But when I started the non-for-profit, I did all that work myself, and I learned how to do it via YouTube. So it's helpful too.
And then another question that we have is, were you able to take any legal action? Or I'll put a couple of them together. Were you able to take any legal action against the state or any of your convictor or anybody that was testifying falsely? Or are there any punishments for the people who did falsify the report?
So I did file suit. It was dismissed because I have to prove that they did that with malicious intent. There's no way to prove that, especially since the man who did it is dead. So my suit was ultimately dismissed. Because they have immunity, there are no repercussions for the things they do. That's one of the things I feel like that need to be addressed for true criminal justice reform to happen.
And then do you need to go in front of the same judge because you say you had to go in front of the same judge when the first time you tried to retry your case? Is that mandatory, or is that just luck of the draw?
No, when you go back in, you're going in front of your same judge or same prosecutor. You go back into the court you were convicted in.
Okay. And then one other question. Somebody just asked, do you think there was any malicious intent with the prosecutor or the ATF people, the people analyzing the burn patterns?
I think my prosecutor, he clearly doesn't like me and will clearly tell you that, I'm a guilty person and got out on a technicality. But I honestly don't believe he knew about the falsified report. And with the fire investigators, I think that the state fire marshals said to the government, look, we've analyzed this. We know it's an arson. We just need you to find something. And I think this chemist thought he was being helpful, and he helped out in several cases to make sure that they got their conviction.
Okay. And then one more question, or two questions more just popped up here. Somebody asked about, do they know about any kind of victimology? So like looking at the effect of being, the effect of crimes and on the victim before you were incarcerated, or is that something you look at now?
I mean, I think that we have more focus on that now, especially with the strides the Innocence Project is making. We're now focusing on, victimology. Was this person truly a victim? What were the circumstances? So I think that's an ongoing process that still hasn't come out. Judy, what do you think?
So the question is,
Oh.
I'm not familiar with the term victimology. Do you mean whether the crime victim was actually a victim, or whether the person who's charged is actually a victim?
Well, I think in this case with the question asker, I think they were like, Kristine's a victim in this case because.
Sure, no, I know.
Yeah. So that's, I think, what the question was about. Like, would this be considered, like, could we look at this as like how this impacts people that are falsely accused or falsely imprisoned?
Oh, well, no, I think it's definitely important to look at the harm done to wrongfully convicted people, because there's Kristine is a very powerful spokesperson, and she went through such a nightmare. But there are people all over the country who have gone through similar nightmares, and I think it's very important to to look at these cases and find out how these convictions happened, and then how the people were able to prove their freedom. And then what Kristine's pointing out is the story doesn't end there. How do they re-enter society? What happens then in the rest of their lives after this trauma and after this lost time? No, I definitely agree. These are very important questions. And that's I think Kristine is such a great spokesperson, because a lot of people see articles in the newspaper or on TV of somebody getting out and rushing into the arms of their family and everybody's hugging and like, what a happy story. But they don't realize that there's all these years to come. And what is that person's life going to be like? And what kind of support is that person going to get from society? I mean, I bet a lot of the people listening to this didn't know until Kristine told them that when you're exonerated and you're proven innocent, you're not eligible for any of these programs that if you were guilty and released from prison, you would get like housing help, job training help, all these kinds of things that when you're exonerated, you're not eligible for those programs.
I would also throw in that the Center on Wrongful Convictions has the only women's project in the country, and they've done a lot of research to talk about, why these things are happening. And in 40% of all women's cases, those women were accused of a loved one. So a child, a father, a mother, their partner. So I think there's a direct correlation when it comes to women who are also victims of some circumstance, and they can twist that around.
Well, if I can just follow up on that for a second, in a high percentage of women's wrongful convictions, there actually was no crime. It was a situation like Kristine's, where there was junk science or an accident or a rare medical condition. But when a child dies under mysterious circumstances, the mother is usually blamed, and the mother's called in and questioned when she's still grieving and still stunned from this loss. And so I think what Kristine describes of her experience is, it's horrifying, but it's important for people to understand that what can happen in these cases.
And
Kristine,
then one other question.
oh, sorry, Hunter, can I ask Kristine? I thought one of the most interesting parts of your story and your time in prison is that you earned your PhD. Is this correct? While you were in prison through Ball State University?
No. So I got associate's and bachelor's degree through Ball State University.
So can you talk about, because right, we're talking to teenagers who are quarantined at home. That can feel like prison, right? And not to make light of what you went through, but how important was it for your journey that you were able to further your education and improve yourself in that way? And is that something you think all prisoners should have access to?
Absolutely, they should have access to it. We had a family preservation program. So our kids actually got to come inside our facility and have one-on-one visits with us. And that was because we didn't have, a high violence rate. They kept us busy. I got associate's and bachelor's degree from Ball State University. I got another associate's degree in theology, paralegal certificate, cosmetology license, desktop publishing. I took a couple of drafting classes and felt like that really wasn't for me. But there was always something to do, some way to make yourself better. And I feel like all too often people judge you on how you look, how you act. And I wanted to show them when I walked back into the court that everything you were told about me wasn't true. I'm not a dumb blonde. I do have a brain. I can talk with the best of them. And so for me, it was a combination of staying busy and showing them up. I feel like right now, while, you know, we have all this extra time, there's plenty to do. And I haven't had a lot of sympathy for my friends who are said, you know, it's hard to shelter in place, because I'm like, well, if you're in prison, we would tell you get a couple soups and a little dude and you'll be fine. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy, but part of that is because, you know, I can get on the computer, I can get on the phone, I can go outside and play with my dogs. It's a lot different from prison. I know it feels harsh for people that can't get out, that are used to it, but I hope they're taking this opportunity to do some things that you wouldn't normally do.
And then, do you think that you were, so this going back to your trial and incarceration, do you think that you were treated differently because you were pregnant? And what was it like being pregnant and having a baby while being incarcerated? Are two questions that came up.
Okay, so I was treated different because I was pregnant. My judge actually said in my sentencing that he felt like I'd managed to get myself impregnated to gain sympathy from the court.
What?
And that wasn't going to happen, and that I would never see that child again. He would be a ward of the state, and I would never, ever know him. Of course, you know, I didn't hear the 60-year sentence. I heard that I wasn't going to have my child, and I'm sobbing and begging my brother to make sure that doesn't happen, because I don't feel like I would have survived losing another one. And the judge, for whatever reason, failed to put in that order. So there was no record of it except what he had said at my sentencing. Giving birth in prison is every bit what you see on some of those awful prison shows. You are handcuffed and shackled while you're pregnant. When they take you out to the doctor, I still have marks on the back of my heels where the shackles, the metal shackles, cut into the back of my ankles. I was taken out in an ambulance because they didn't realize that I'd missed my last 3 appointments. And so when I went into labor, I didn't recognize that I was in labor because I'd had an emergency C-section with my first. So I didn't realize that the back pain I'd had for a day was actually labor. And when I got to the infirmary, they couldn't find the heartbeat. So of course I was hysterical. They shackled me up, put me in the ambulance, got me out there. And I thought, okay, you know, it's over. I've lost him. And the doctor come in and he was like, are these necessary? She's not going to get up and walk away. And they were like, they stay on. So he got the foot shackles removed so that he could assure me that my baby was still alive, that the contractions were just so close. And then he said, what happened with your first? I told him. He went and called my doctor, and he come back in and he said, I'm determining that you need an emergency C-section again. He said, we're going to put her out. And so the handcuffs stayed on until I was out. And when I woke up, I had a metal anklet with a log chain around my ankle that allowed me just enough room to get over to the bathroom and back to my hospital bed.
Oh. And then one other question that it follows up really nice with this one is, have you ever looked back and thought to yourself or felt something similar to like an accomplishment for having persevered through all this? Like, you know, you can look back and say, wow, look what I've already endured in my life. And does that give you strength in like going through things today?
I think, yes, it gives me strength because the worst has already happened to me. You can't do anything worse than what has already happened, what you've already taken from me. But I also look at it as it's a significant form of loss, because the ramifications of what I've endured are something that I carry nonstop. I still have nightmares. I still attend counseling for PTSD, I still will freak out and have panic attacks. So there's so much in that yes, I feel like I survived, but some days it's still like I'm still trying to survive.
And then I have one more, or I have another question that popped up. And this might be, Judy, you might know more about this, but are wrongful convictions more common in rural or urban areas? And was it just police officers and experts who testified at the trial, or are there any other like witnesses for either the prosecution or defense?
Okay. Wrongful convictions occur in both rural and urban areas. I mean, if you were looking at you know, the numbers, you would see a lot more in urban areas, especially because Chicago, for example, is known throughout the country as the false confession capital of the world, because there have been certain police officers who were responsible for many wrongful convictions. There was John Burge, who did the torture cases. There's Detective Guevara. His cases are still before the courts. Certain police officers who just, you know, spent years getting people to make false confessions, and that ended up being wrongful convictions. But it is something that that happens, as Kristine's case shows, in rural areas. It happens throughout the country, you know, throughout the world. But it happens more often if you have a situation where you have, you know, for example, police officers doing certain types of practices, then the numbers are going to be way up. But like Kristine's case, a junk science, that could happen. I mean, that kind of case could happen anywhere.
Well, Kristine, I want to respect your time. I know I think we said an hour. I'll give you one more chance though, because we have mostly seniors listening, watching this. They're about to move out into the world, leave home, a lot of them. Is there any advice you would give to our kids who are about to go out on their journey? Anything you want to share with them?
I would tell them that no matter where they go, what they do, they can make a difference. They can change lives. Never minimize the impact they're going to have on the world, because the smallest things make the biggest difference.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Kristine.
Thank you.
We posted your non-for-profit on the YouTube comments. So we directed the kids to go and check that out, okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, guys. Have a good Friday.
Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thank
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.